March 28, 1944. On the rocky headland near Trondheim, inside a reinforced German radar bunker, an operator leaned over his glowing cathode screen and froze. Dozens of new signals had just appeared, powerful, steady echoes moving north at convoy speed. The young sergeant wiped condensation from the glass and stared again. One contact might have been a stray reflection. Two could be atmospheric noise. But this was a fleet. Within minutes, phones rang from Stavanger to Narvik. Messages rushed up the command chain to Admiral Theodor Kranke of the Kriegsmarines Marine Gruppen Commando West. The British fleet, it seemed, was moving toward Norway. At the same moment, high above the gray sea, Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft struggled against wind and ice to spot what radar had already seen. Yet through the swirling cloud there was nothing. No wakes, no smoke, no ships. Still, the radar returns were undeniable. To German analysts, the meaning was clear. The Allies were preparing to invade Norway. It fit the logic of their worst fears. For months, Hitler had obsessed over the idea that the next Allied landing would strike the Scandinavian coast, cutting Germany's access to Swedish iron ore and threatening the northern flank of Europe. He had repeatedly ordered his generals to keep strong forces there for the decisive moment. Now, the decisive moment seemed to have come. The Phantom Fleet approaching through the mist was the confirmation he had been waiting for. But what none of those radar operators, pilots, or admirals knew was that the entire armada they were tracking, the fleet that had just triggered Germany's northern defenses, did not exist. Its signals came from a handful of British wireless operators sitting in cold wooden huts along the Scottish coast. Their codenamed mission was Operation Skye, part of a greater deception known as Fortitude North, and their task was to make Hitler believe that the Royal Navy's home fleet, under Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser, was preparing a massive assault on Norway. The operators worked with surgical precision. Using captured knowledge of German naval radio procedure, they transmitted coded traffic that mimicked the chatter of entire task forces. Orders to refuel, weather updates, encrypted bearings, and the casual banter of officers coordinating an invasion fleet. Each transmission was timed and spaced exactly as real warships would send them. Meanwhile, radar reflectors, metal frames, and foil-covered balloons were moored off the coast of the Shetland and Orkney Islands, bouncing back signals that looked like moving ships. Small coastal patrol boats towed these reflectors in patterns matching convoy formations. To German radar, the illusion was perfect. In the intelligence rooms of the Abwehr, analysts began plotting these ships on charts. The radio direction finding bearings matched the radar tracks. Reports from Swedish observers even spoke of heavy British naval movements in the North Sea. Sightings that had been subtly encouraged by Allied double agents working under M1Y5's double-cross system. Every thread reinforced the same conclusion. The Allies were preparing to invade Norway. By the evening of March 29th, German command had ordered U-boat patrols north from Kiel, and the battleship Tirpitz, still undergoing repairs in Altafjord, was placed on high alert. Fuel and ammunition were rushed to Norwegian bases, all for a fleet that existed only in the airwaves. The deception had begun, and it would soon grow into one of the greatest acts of misdirection in military history. Because in the coming months, while Hitler's attention remained fixed on the cold fjords of Norway, the real Allied invasion force would gather hundreds of miles to the south, in silence, along the coasts of southern England. The phantom warships of Operation Skye had done what no bomb or torpedo could achieve. They had entered Hitler's imagination, and once there they would keep his armies frozen in the wrong place until it was far too late. Britain was bracing for what many believed would be the greatest seaborne assault in human history. The destination? France. The date? Undisclosed. The opponent? Sea, air, land, and critically, the steel-nerved command of Adolf Hitler and the Kriegsmarine. Yet in the cold, wind-swept reaches of northern Scotland and the Hebrides, an entirely different war was being waged. The war of shadows and radio waves, of reflected radar and whispered lies. A war not of ships and guns, but of phantom fleets and invisible armies. The plan had a name: Operation Fortitude. Conceived in late 1943 by the London Controlling Section and carried forward by Chef's Deception subunits, Fortitude was divided into two parts: north to threaten Norway and south to threaten Pas-de-Calais. For Fortitude. North, the target was the cold, fjord-cut coast of Scandinavia, a place Hitler feared above many others. He believed a strike through Norway could sever Germany's supply of Swedish iron ore and destabilize the entire northern flank. The Allies would exploit that fear. They would create a ghost navy, a fleet that existed only in the airwaves, the radar blips, and the minds of German intelligence. A fleet that would compel Hitler to hold back his warships, his U-boats, his strength, all while the real invasion force assembled thousands of miles to the south. Behind the curtain, from a nondescript station near Edinburgh Castle, American and British officers supervised the creation of phantom formations. A sub-operation called Operation Skye provided the specific radio traffic element for the Norwegian deception. Skilled wireless operators sat at their desks in chilly huts on the Scottish coast, many of them servicemen who had fought failed amphibious campaigns or stormed beaches in far-off lands. They now served no guns, but dials, wires, transmitters. Their mission to generate the hundreds of wireless messages that would mimic the movement of battleships, carriers, destroyers. They transmitted the routines of real fleets, bearing reports, fuel demands, Task Force 1 refuel at Scapa Flow, weather bulletins, low-pressure system seaward, drift passing Orkney, course changes, 180-degree turn to port to avoid minefield, all meticulously scripted to match German naval protocols. German direction-finding units picked up the signals. Radar stations tracked the moving reflections. The illusion began to coalesce. At the same time, physical decoys enhanced the lie. Along the Shetland and Orkney coasts, small boats towed radar reflectors, metal frames covered in aluminium foil designed to present large moving targets on German radar. These rogue blips were maneuvered in convoy-like patterns. German operators saw destroyer-sized echoes threading north. The enemy believed the signals. The enemy believed in the fleet. A critical element, communications traffic, had to match radar positions. The direction-finding bearings of radio sets triangulated on the Scottish coast. When radar contacted a task force moving eastwards, wireless traffic simultaneously referenced enemy Posselt intercept. Subgroup Alpha proceeding to Norway, as scheduled. To break this synchrony would risk skepticism. To align it succeeded brilliantly. In Edinburgh, Colonel MacLeod oversaw Fortitude North's execution. His brief: ensure the German High Command believed in a real force, not just a fake convoy, but a full amphibious fleet gathering in Scotland. Stories were planted in Sweden and neutral countries, detachments transferring to northern Scotland, requisition of accommodation in the Orkneys, requests by the Norwegians to guard their own borders. Each piece of information reinforced the narrative. Double agent networks played their role too. Agents under the 20 Committee fed Berlin reports of Allied preparations for a Norway invasion. The German Abwehr logbooks recorded references to a buildup in the Firth of Forth and the Orkneys. This chimed with the radar returns. This chimed with the wireless chatter. The net closed. Allied sailors watching for summer light creeping across northern seas, yet their orders were not to strike, but to mislead, to send their signals, to tow the reflectors, to create false wakes and false hope for the enemy. Their weapon, deception. Meanwhile, behind the scenes in southern England, the real fleet gathered. Materials, troops, armored divisions, beach landing craft were camouflaged, hidden, loaded for invasion. But the Germans believed those southern shores were simply the rehearsal stage. The real assault would come in Norway. The diversion had to be credible. As April turned to May 1944, radio logbooks recorded multiple convoy crossings from Scapa Flow to Tromsø. German coastal batteries in Norway reported radar sightings of ship groups off the coast. Hitler and his staff underlined the reports in red. They dispatched U-boats from Kiel and warships from the Baltic up toward Narvik and Trondheim. Their direction, north. Under this pressure, the Kriegsmarine's heavy units, including the battleship Tirpitz at Altafjord in northern Norway, were placed on full alert. Resources that could have reinforced the defense of Normandy began to move toward the Arctic shores. The Germans were playing catch-up, reacting to shadows. What made the illusion so successful was the layered nature of the deception. It was not a single radio broadcast or a dummy ship floating alone. It was synchronized wireless transmissions, direction-finding deception, radar reflection, reports from neutral nations, planted news items, double-agent confirmatory leaks. The enemy's pre-existing belief that Norway was vulnerable was exploited. This is central to what historians call Magruder's principle. It is easier to deceive someone into holding on to a wrong belief than to change a correct one. In the night on 15th May 1944, the coastal station at Lerwick logged a message. TF-12 underway, speed 12 knots, ETA Tromsø, 26th May. German radar stations recorded moving blips forming in convoy formation eastwards. In Oslo and Berlin, the reports merged, large Allied naval presence en route to northern Norway. Hitler's strategic fears locked into place. Meanwhile, Britain's invisible navy sailed steadily. Not one real capital ship left the Firth of Forth in that operation. The movement was entirely virtual. The message was what counted. By June, as the real invasion approached, Fortitude North's pieces were all in motion. Wireless traffic increased. Coastal vessels towed reflectors into patrol patterns. Keels, but only phantom ones, cut the waters of enemy radar. The story the Germans consumed was perfect. The sailor who tugged a tiny trawler towing a massive radar reflector late into the night, the Wren reviewing direction-finding bearings, the intelligence officer watching decrypted German messages and seeing the lie take effect. Their contribution was hidden, uncelebrated, but essential. And so the stage was set. The Phantom Fleet forced Germany northwards. Hitler kept his heavy warships idle in Norway. The stage awaited the real assault. In the next part, we will move into the final hours. How the illusion collapsed into real action, and how the Germans finally responded too late. But here, in the frozen North Seas and Scottish Lochs, Britain's invisible navy had already struck a blow, not with guns, not with torpedoes, but with deception. May 1944. Along the cold harbors of Scotland's northern coast, dawn rose pale over water that smelled of salt and coal smoke. Inside a squat wooden hut near Inverness, a radio operator in Royal Navy blues adjusted a dial and began to transmit. His call sign was TF1. His message contained routine convoy coordinates. His signal strength and frequency matched those of a fleet cruising somewhere off the Norwegian Sea. But there was no fleet, only him, his Morse key, and the illusion of movement spreading invisibly across the North Atlantic. This was Operation Skye, the sound and signal of a navy that did not exist. It was part of the greater deception known as Operation Fortitude North, itself one strand of the vast Allied web of deceit collectively codenamed Operation Bodyguard, the grand strategic ruse designed to disguise the true destination of the D-Day invasion. The deception was born from simple arithmetic. If Hitler could be made to defend everywhere, he would defend nowhere effectively. And Norway was his blind spot, a fear that never left him. Ever since the German occupation of Norway in 1940, Hitler had considered it vital. Its fjords sheltered the battleship Tirpitz, its ports guarded the northern flank of Europe, and its mines supplied the Reich with iron ore from neutral Sweden. Repeated British raids, Narvik, Lofoten, and Vagsø, had convinced him the Allies still coveted it. By 1944 he kept nearly 350,000 troops and large naval forces stationed there, including 11 divisions under General Franz Bohm. Allied intelligence intended to keep them there. To make the threat believable, deception had to echo reality. The Royal Navy's Home Fleet, commanded by Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser, was indeed anchored at Scapa Flow in the Orkneys. It had the capacity to threaten Norway at any time. But in the months before D-Day, Fraser's ships stayed put. What moved instead were their voices, their shadows, and their ghosts. The operations planning began in the London basement offices of the Naval Intelligence Division, under the quiet oversight of Admiral John Henry Godfrey, whose aide during the early war years had been Ian Fleming, the future creator of James Bond. By 1944, Godfrey's deception section worked hand in hand with Colonel John Bevan of the London Controlling Section and Colonel Ralph MacLeod of Schaeff's Deception Branch. Their challenge was to invent a naval story detailed enough to fool not only the Abwehr, but also the Luftwaffe's radar and reconnaissance analysts. Operation Skye would simulate three main elements: a British fleet assembling at Scapa Flow, preparations for an amphibious invasion of Norway, and continuous radio and radar activity consistent with those operations. To achieve this, they combined old and new methods of deception, time-tested radio play, radar reflection, and the subtle art of corroborating rumor. In the Shetlands and Orkneys, Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve men, wireless experts, and civilian engineers formed the nucleus of Skye's communications team. They worked from unheated huts lined with cork tiles for soundproofing. Each man operated under a ship's identity: destroyers, cruisers, even aircraft carriers. Their logs mirrored real naval procedure down to weather reports and fuel calculations. Messages were broadcast at precisely timed intervals to reproduce the discipline of convoy communication. To German ears, the chatter of an entire armada filled the air. At the same time, On barren headlands around Skye, radar reflectors made from chicken wire and foil-covered wood were mounted on rafts and buoys. When small coastal vessels towed these arrays across open water, German Freya and Würzburg radars detected large echoes that moved at fleet speed. Every visual element supported the lie. Deception was not only wires and waves, it was people. Double agents in the double-cross system were vital in planting stories of troop concentrations in northern Scotland. Chief among them was Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo by MY5 and Arabelle by the Germans. From his London apartment, Garbo sent carefully crafted reports to his Abwehr handlers describing non-existent divisions. The British Fourth Army, supposedly based in Edinburgh and Dundee, complete with fictitious regimental insignia and supply movements. The Germans swallowed it whole. Their own intelligence maps began to show Fourth Army HQ Edinburgh. It was a pure invention, yet the Abwehr confirmed it through independent sources. Other double agents such as Tate and Mutt and Jeff in Norway, all working for Britain. The deception became self-reinforcing. By late May, Enigma decrypts from Bletchley Park revealed that the German High Command believed at least 50,000 Allied troops were in Scotland, preparing to strike at Trondheim and Stavanger. The Phantom Army had a Phantom fleet, and the pieces fitted perfectly. At 3:40 on 25 May 1944, wireless stations on the Moray Firth began transmitting a new schedule of high-power messages. Operators followed the rhythm of real convoys, long bursts for navigation, short exchanges for tactical signals. Frequency hopping mimicked the pattern of multiple ships. Each ship kept a distinct radio personality, an impatient destroyer captain tapping curt bursts, a carrier controller sending long, precise updates. The chatter was technically meaningless, but procedurally exact. To further authenticate it, engineers inserted genuine weather and tidal data from the Norwegian Sea, drawn from Admiralty forecasts. German meteorologists later confirmed these conditions in intercepted messages, proof to them that the fleet was indeed in those waters. Occasionally, the illusion bordered on theater. In one episode recorded in Naval Archives, a Scottish operator keyed an emergency report. Submarine sighted bearing 040 degrees. Depth charge pattern released. Another operator, acting as escort command, replied sharply, "Negative contact. Maintain course." The exchange was pure fabrication, but German listening stations logged it and noted possible anti-submarine action west of Stavanger. The Phantom fleet was now fighting Phantom battles. Deception demanded perfection. One misplaced call sign, one message transmitted at the wrong time of day, could expose the entire scheme. German cryptanalysts were experts in traffic analysis. They could identify a fleet's size and composition not by decoding messages, but by timing, rhythm, and signal strength. To maintain realism, the Skye operators kept meticulous records of every vessel. They rotated frequencies every 6 hours, altered Morse fists to vary keying habits, and introduced deliberate minor errors, the kind real humans made under stress. The illusion of imperfection sold the lie. Meanwhile, Royal Air Force units played their part. From Wick and Sumburg, patrol aircraft of Coastal Command flew daily sorties along Norwegian routes, visible on German radar screens as if covering the approaching fleet. In truth, they were unarmed or flying routine weather runs. But combined with Skye's radio traffic, they appeared to be reconnaissance for an invasion. To corroborate it all, British intelligence fed rumors through neutral Sweden. British attachés leaked inquiries about Arctic navigation charts and Norwegian interpreters. Norwegian resistance contacts were encouraged to stage visible preparations. Extra wireless activity, coded references to the return. The mosaic was flawless. By the first week of June 1944, the deception's effects rippled across the German command network. Enigma decrypts at Bletchley revealed orders from Admiral Karl Dönitz himself. Increased vigilance in northern waters. Enemy fleet movements north from Scotland indicate probable operation against Norway. Hitler's paranoia completed the deception. He refused to accept that the Allies would invade France alone. He was convinced any attack in Normandy would be a feint. His own directive, Führer Order Number 51, issued months earlier, had warned of a possible northern assault. Skye's Phantom Fleet fit that prophecy too neatly to doubt. German radar stations along the Norwegian coast reported major formations approaching. Luftwaffe reconnaissance squadrons were dispatched to confirm, but encountered only clouds and the endless gray sea. Yet their instruments still showed signals. Dönitz interpreted this as proof the fleet was using smoke screens and weather cover. On the 6th of June, 1944, the morning of D-Day, as Allied troops landed in Normandy, Hitler's Army Group Norway remained immobilized. Out of nearly 500,000 German soldiers stationed there, none were redeployed. The battleship Tirpitz and her escorts stayed locked in fjords, guarding against ghosts. The deception had done its job. For the men of Skye, success brought no celebration, only silence. Their work remained classified for decades. Many returned to ordinary civilian life, never revealing that they had commanded a fleet of nothing. Some died, never knowing the scale of what their invisible transmissions achieved. One wireless operator, Lieutenant Peter Lockwood, later recalled, "We knew the Germans were listening. You could almost feel them on the other end. Every time you keyed the transmitter, you imagined some poor fellow in Trondheim taking notes, convinced you were a battleship captain." Lockwood's father had served at Jutland in the First World War. He would never have imagined his son fighting a war of phantom ships and fabricated convoys. Yet the effect was real, measured not in shells fired, but in divisions pinned down, lives saved, and an invasion secured. Historians later estimated that Fortitude North kept 13 German divisions stationed in Norway throughout the summer of 1944, divisions that might otherwise have reinforced Normandy. The success of Operation Skye amplified that illusion. It kept the Kriegsmarine dispersed and disoriented. Operation Skye was one instrument in a wider orchestra. Alongside it played Operation Glimmer and Operation Taxable, which on D-Day itself used radar-reflecting chaff window to simulate invasion fleets off Pas-de-Calais and Cap d'Antifer. The same principle applied: overwhelm enemy radar with ghosts. The technology differed. Skye relied on sustained radio simulation, Glimmer and Taxable on airborne chaff. But the philosophy was identical. In modern military history, these are recognized as precursors of electronic warfare, the deliberate manipulation of the electromagnetic spectrum to shape an enemy's perception of reality. The men who built Skye understood none of those future doctrines. They thought of themselves simply as communicators, technicians doing their part. But their craft foreshadowed the era of digital deception to come. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, Allied intelligence interrogators questioned captured officers from the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht about the supposed Norway invasion. Many still believed it had been planned and only cancelled after the Normandy landings. Some claimed to have received reports of Allied fleet sightings well into July 1944, echoes of Skye's lingering transmissions, which continued sporadically through the summer to maintain the illusion. Those ghosts remained alive in German records for months, proof that even after the guns had fallen silent, deception continued to cast its shadow. In the years that followed, few official documents mentioned Skye. It was buried within the classified appendices of fortitude reports, overshadowed by the larger drama of D-Day. Only decades later did historians uncover the full story through declassified files at the British National Archives. Many families of naval wireless operators, coastal sailors, and WRENS never knew their relatives had been part of something extraordinary. Their contributions left no medals, no battle honors, no photographs of victory, only the steady pulse of a transmitter in a hut facing the North Sea. Yet their work altered history. It safeguarded the landings that liberated Europe, and it stands as a reminder that truth in war is often the first weapon to be forged and the last to be revealed. By the summer of 1944, the ghost fleet of Operation Skye had faded back into the mist. Its transmitters fell silent, the radar echoes drifted away, but the illusion they had woven persisted in German minds long enough to change the course of the war. The warship that never existed had done its duty. June 1944. In the command bunkers of northern Germany, confusion spread like fire through the wires. As Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, reports from radar stations along the Norwegian coast painted an entirely different picture, a massive British naval task force moving toward the fjords of Trondheim and Narvik. To Adolf Hitler, it was the confirmation of what he had predicted all along. Normandy was only a diversion. The real invasion, he was convinced, was about to strike his northern flank. That morning, messages poured into the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht from across occupied Europe. At the naval headquarters in Kiel, Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander-in-chief of the Kriegsmarine, paced between operations maps covered in pins and strings. His staff briefed him. Enemy radar contacts approaching Norwegian waters. Multiple signals consistent with capital ships. Intercepted British wireless indicates convoy movement north. The data seemed undeniable. German listening posts from Bergen to Tromsø had triangulated over 100 separate transmissions, matching the radio discipline of a large fleet. Intercept officers could even differentiate between destroyer chatter and carrier command signals. To them, this was no mere static or mistake. It was the prelude to invasion. Dönitz issued immediate orders. U-boats stationed at Kiel and Trondheim were to move north into defensive patrol lines, codenamed Gruppe Trutz, Group Defiance. The battleship Tirpitz, still damaged from British midget submarine attacks months earlier, was placed on full alert in Altafjord. Support vessels scrambled to refuel her, and Luftwaffe squadrons based in Denmark were ordered to begin reconnaissance flights toward the Shetland Islands. Every hour, Enigma-encoded messages raced through the network, intercepted and decrypted within hours by Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park. There, in a quiet hut in Buckinghamshire, analysts under Commander Edward Travis watched the German panic unfold in real time. They read the messages as if eavesdropping on history itself. One decrypted report read, British fleet confirmed on northern course, expected landings in Norway within 72 hours. The analysts exchanged glances. The illusion had not only worked, it had consumed the German command's entire attention. Inside Hitler's headquarters at the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Reports from France arrived one after another. American, British, and Canadian troops had secured a foothold in Normandy. Yet the Führer remained unmoved. He saw it as a feint, a diversionary attack to draw off reserves. As he wrote in a directive that morning, to the horror of his generals, he refused to release panzer divisions from the Pas-de-Calais region or the 15th Army stationed along the Channel coast. He ordered them to remain in place, waiting for the main landing he believed would come in the north. His reasoning was not irrational. The geography of Norway, with its deep fjords and access to the Arctic convoys, made it strategically vital. A successful Allied landing there could cut Germany off from critical resources. And after years of being deceived by Allied feints, Crete, Dieppe, even the Dodecanese, Hitler's instinct was to distrust the obvious. Operation Skye, without ever firing a shot, had reached directly into his paranoia. Across occupied Norway, German forces moved to battle stations. General Lothar Rendulic, commander of the 20th Mountain Army, received urgent instructions from Berlin to prepare coastal defenses from Stavanger to Tromsø. Fuel and ammunition convoys were dispatched northward. Airfields at Bardufoss and Banak buzzed with activity. Coastal guns were manned, and infantry divisions took up positions overlooking empty seas. Norwegian civilians, already living under 4 years of occupation, watched the sudden mobilization with quiet bewilderment. Many believed the invasion was truly coming. Resistance groups passed coded messages to London reporting German reinforcements moving through their towns. Unknowingly, they were describing the success of a deception they had helped to build. Meanwhile, in Britain, the men behind Operation Skye continued their transmissions as if nothing had changed. They followed schedules, varied frequencies, and kept up the illusion of motion. Some of them knew, through fragmentary intelligence, that the Germans had taken the bait, but none realized the full scale of it. Their invisible fleet had forced Germany to lock down an entire region of Europe. At Bletchley Park, decrypts revealed that on the 8th of June 1944, 2 days after D-Day, Dönitz ordered the 8th U-boat flotilla to deploy north of the Shetlands in a screening pattern. At the same time, Admiral Otto Schneewind, Chief of Naval Staff, warned Berlin that the British Home Fleet might attempt to cut through the Skagerrak Strait into the Baltic. It was a logistical impossibility, but the fear was real. Every phantom signal reinforced it. To keep up the deception, British intelligence expanded the scope of the illusion. Double Agent Garbo sent urgent confirmation that troop movements in northern Scotland had increased. He reported hearing soldiers discussing the Norway landings and supply ships heading north. His messages, encoded in elaborate ciphers, were received in Madrid and relayed to Berlin, where they matched perfectly with the intercepted radio and radar data. The German intelligence machine, proud of its analytical precision, had trapped itself in its own logic. On 10th June, Hitler personally dictated a new directive to the OKW. Enemy main operation in Norway possible within days. Maintain full alert. No redeployment of forces from Scandinavia. That same day, British troops in Normandy fought to capture Caen, and American divisions broke out from the beachhead at Utah. The German 15th Army, the largest reserve force in Western Europe, stayed frozen, waiting for an invasion that would never come. In the cold northern seas, German destroyers patrolled endlessly, chasing radar ghosts. The men aboard stared into the fog, straining for silhouettes that were not there. One officer later told interrogators, "The British ships were invisible, but their signals were everywhere." We were convinced they were coming. The illusion's power lay not only in technology, but in psychology. Operation Skye exploited what the German command already believed. Every radar echo, every intercepted transmission confirmed their fear. To them, the absence of visible ships was not proof of deception, but evidence of stealth. They assumed the British were concealing their fleet under radio silence or bad weather. By mid-June, even as Allied forces pushed inland from Normandy, the German northern commands continued to issue frantic alerts. The 6th Mountain Division was ordered to move closer to the coast near Bordeaux. Luftwaffe patrols wasted precious fuel searching empty skies. The Kriegsmarine's northern bases consumed supplies meant for the defense of France. The Allies, through the decrypts, could see it all happening. Reports from Bletchley reached SHAEF headquarters in Southwick House, where General Dwight D. Eisenhower and his staff read them with quiet satisfaction. The deception had bought them weeks of precious time. Each day that passed without German reinforcements arriving from Norway increased the chance that the Normandy beachhead would hold. When the Allies finally broke out from the hedgerows in July, Hitler still refused to release his northern armies. In his mind, the great fleet that had once appeared on his radar screens might reemerge at any moment. The phantom warships of Operation Skye had become ghosts haunting his strategy. In retrospect, historians have seen this moment as one of the greatest psychological victories of the war. Without the diversion of Fortitude North, and without the spectral armada that Operation Skye projected across the airwaves, the defense of Normandy might have been very different. The German 15th Army could have struck the Allied flank within days. Instead, it waited in vain. For the men who created the illusion, there was no triumphal headline. Their mission remained secret, buried under layers of classification. Yet their work, quiet, meticulous, and invisible, had changed the outcome of the greatest amphibious invasion in history. In the chilly summer of 1944, as the real ships of the Royal Navy escorted convoys across the Channel, the ghost fleet that had never sailed dissolved into static and silence. But its echo endured, reverberating through the corridors of the German High Command, in every intercepted message that began with the same desperate words: "Enemy fleet sighted, position uncertain." Operation Skye had done what no weapon could. It had deceived the most paranoid mind of the 20th century, turned radio waves into soldiers, and won a battle without ever existing. By the end of June 1944, the fog over the Norwegian Sea had thinned, but the fog inside the German High Command only deepened. Reports from their radar stations still spoke of fleeting echoes, of convoys that appeared and vanished, of warships that left no wake. Yet the Allies' real fleet had long since turned south toward France, and the phantom ships of Operation Skye were fading into the static of their own creation. In Altafjord, the battleship Tirpitz still lay hidden between the mountains, her crew standing by their guns, waiting for an enemy that would never come. Around them, the war moved on. In Normandy, Allied divisions had broken through German defenses and were pushing inland. The Wehrmacht's 15th Army, still frozen by Hitler's orders, remained idle along the Channel coast, convinced another invasion would strike Calais. From the far north to the French ports, Germany was locked in place by fear of shadows. In London, those who had crafted the deception received the first decrypted proof of their success. Enigma messages showed that Army Group Norway still held its positions intact, believing in the threat of a massive British fleet preparing to strike from Scotland. The illusion had not only endured through D-Day, it had extended Hitler's paralysis for weeks. The naval officers who had overseen Operation Skye said little about it. They had fought their war not with torpedoes or guns, but with wavelengths and patience. For them, victory was a quiet thing, a Morse signal unanswered, a radar echo unverified. Many returned to ordinary duties as if nothing had happened. Their reports, stamped most secret, were sealed in archives and forgotten. Yet what they had achieved rippled across Europe in ways no one could see. Historians later calculated that in the summer of 1944, more than 400,000 German soldiers and almost the entire Northern Fleet were tied down in Norway and Denmark. Had even a fraction of them been redeployed to France, the battles for Caen, Saint-Lô, or the Falaise Pocket might have taken a very different turn. Operation Skye had not won the war, but it had bought time, and in war, time is life. For the British wireless operators who carried out the plan, that knowledge was enough. In the years after the war, some of them would sit quietly at reunions or naval gatherings, listening as others spoke of Atlantic convoys or Normandy landings. They said little of their part. Their fleet had no hulls, no decks, no names painted on bows. But their signals had carried the weight of history. In Norway, people would later remember that strange June of 1944, the sudden German mobilization, the patrols, the restless nights when everyone expected invasion. Some believed it was only chance that spared them. Few realized they had been actors in a play written in distant rooms, scripted in code and transmitted through the ether. In Berlin, the war's architects tried to make sense of their defeat. When the truth of the Normandy landings could no longer be denied, Hitler still insisted that another blow might fall in Norway. Even in August, long after the Allies had secured France, he ordered divisions in the north to stay in position. The Ghost Fleet had lingered in his imagination long after its signals had ceased. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, captured officers questioned by Allied intelligence continued to mention the great British fleet that threatened Norway. To them, the ships had been real. They had read the radar plots, heard the wireless chatter, seen the supposed landings outlined in reports. The deception had outlived the war itself. Years later, when the files of Operation Fortitude were declassified, historians pieced together the puzzle, how a handful of wireless operators and intelligence officers had reshaped the movements of armies and fleets. They saw how a phantom navy, born from wires and static, had changed the balance of power. The operation's name, Skye, was almost poetic, a fleet made of air drifting between truth and illusion, fighting a battle in which no one died, but countless lives were saved. The legacy of that deception lies not only in strategy, but in memory. It reminds us that wars are fought not only by those who storm beaches, but also by those who sit in silence behind a transmitter, turning fear into signal and signal into victory. Behind every grand campaign lie invisible acts of courage, unseen, unsung, but no less decisive. And so the story circles back to its beginning, to that spring morning when German radar screens lit up with echoes of a fleet that wasn't there. In that moment, the imagination of one side became the obsession of the other. The Royal Navy's greatest weapon that year was not a battleship or a carrier. It was belief itself. Operation Skye proved that in the war for Europe, victory sometimes belonged not to the ships that sailed, but to the warship that vanished and tricked Hitler into moving his fleet.